When Turnus raised the flag of war from Laurentium's high citadel, when the horns blared and he whipped his horses to a fury and clashed his arms, there was an instant, spirited reaction. All of Latium rose to swear allegiance. Young men raged to fight, their leaders, Messapus and Ufens, with Mezentius, who held the gods in contempt, mustered troops from all over and ransacked the wide fields of their farmers. They even sent Venulus to great Diomedes' city to seek aid and to announce that Trojans were settling in Latium, that Aeneas had arrived with his fleet and his vanquished gods, proclaiming himself king by divine right, and that many tribes were joining the Dardan hero as his name spread wide. All to what end, should fortune favor him, would be clearer to Diomedes himself than to either Turnus or King Latinus. Thus Latium, and Aeneas, hero in the line of Laomedon, saw it all and was tossed on a great sea of troubles. His mind darted this way and that, turning and shifting. Sunlight or the radiant moon reflected from water trembling in a bronze bowl will glance and flit all over a room, and then flash and suddenly onto the coffered ceiling high above. It was night, and all over earth deep slumber held weary creatures of the air and field. Father Aeneas, heart troubled by war, lay down on the riverbank under a cold sky and drifted off at last to sleep. He dreamed that Tiberinus, the old river god himself, lifted his head amid the poplar leaves, draped in a fine gray linen mantle, his hair crowned with shady reeds, and spoke to him, calming his fears. Child of the gods, you bring us our Troy back from the enemy, and you preserve Pergamum forever. You have been awaited on Laurentine soil, in Latin fields. Here your home is sure, do not draw back. And sure are your gods. Do not be frightened by threats of war. All the swollen wrath of the gods has ebbed away. To assure you this is no empty dream, I offer a sign. Lying under oaks, you will find a sow near a hidden stream, with a litter of 30. A white mother lying on the ground and white young nursing. Here shall be your city, and surcease from sorrow. The sign foretells that in 30 circling years Ascanius will found a city, glorious Alba. My prophecy is sure. As to the present ills, I will explain in brief how you may emerge victorious. On these shores, Arcadians, descended from Pallas and led by King Evander, have built a city in the hills and called it Pallanteum, after their forefather Pallas. They are ever at war with the Latin race. These Arcadians you must take as allies. I myself will conduct you straight upstream so that your oars will overpower the current. Now rise, goddess born, and as the stars set, pray to Juno and prevail upon her to end her angry threats. And when you win out, pay tribute to me. I am he whom you see gliding through my banks in full flow and cutting through the rich plowland, the blue Tiber, river most beloved by heaven. Here is my great home, and my headwaters flow from high cities. Thus the river, and he plunged into a deep pool, seeking the depths. Night and sleep left Aeneas. He rose, and looking at the rising sun, lifted water from the river with cupped palms in ritual fashion and prayed aloud. Nymphs, Laurentine nymphs, at the source of all streams, and you, Father Tiber, with your sacred water, receive Aeneas and keep him from harm. Whatever spring, whatever pool holds you, from whatever soil you flow forth in all your beauty, pitying my trials, you will be honored forever with my gifts. O horned river god, lord of Hesperian waters, only be with me now and confirm your divine presence. Thus Aeneas, and choosing 2 galleys from his fleet, he picked out crews and equipped the men. And then a sudden marvel met his gaze. Gleaming through the wood, and as white as her milk-white litter, a sow lay outstretched on the green river bank. Pious Aeneas offered her to you, Juno most mighty, setting her with her brood before your altar. All the night long Tiber calmed his current, flowing backward until the water stood so still it might have been a pool or quiet lake offering no resistance to the dipping oars. The crews cheered as the ship sped along, and the well-cocked pine glided on the water. The waves wondered, and the woods too, unused to such a sight. The shields glittered on the water, and the painted hulls floating upriver. The men rowed night and day, around the long bends and under changing trees, their oars cutting through the green woods on the river's calm surface. The burning sun had reached heaven's meridian when they sighted walls off in the distance and a few scattered huts which Roman might has now raised to the sky, but at that time were King Evander's humble domain. They turned their prows and drew up to the town. The Arcadian king was making sacrifice to Hercules that day, and to all the gods in a grove outside the city. With him were his son Pallas, all the men of rank, and the humble senate offering incense as the blood and warm meat smoked on the altar. When they saw the tall ships gliding up between the shady banks and the crew rowing noiselessly, they rose up in alarm and left the feast. But Pallas kept his nerve, and ordering them not to break off the rites, he seized his spear and ran out to meet the strangers himself. Standing on a mound, he cried out to them, "Men-at-arms, what has forced you to travel routes unknown? Where are you heading? What is your race, your home? Do you come in peace or war?" Then Father Aeneas, holding out a branch of peaceful olives, spoke from his high stern. "You see before you men of Troy and arms at war with the Latins, who in their arrogance have driven us to flight. We seek Evander. Tell him that Dardanians, men of rank, have come to propose an alliance at arms." Pallas was stunned when he heard the name Dardanian, and he said, "Come forward, whoever you are, and speak to my father face to face, as a guest at our hearth." And he clasped Aeneas's hand. Together they left the river and entered the grove. Then Aeneas addressed the king graciously. "Noblest of the Greeks, it is my good fortune to make my prayer to you, and offer boughs hung with sacral wreaths. I have no cause to fear your lineage as a Danaan lord, and an Arcadian with ties to Atreus' sons. My own nobility and heaven's oracles, our forefathers' kinship, and your fame, which has spread throughout the world. All this has bound me to you and brought me here, consenting to fate. Dardanus, as the Greeks tell it, was Ilium's founding father, born of Electra, who herself was the daughter of Atlas, upon whose shoulders rested the celestial sphere. Your ancestor is Mercury, whom shining Maia conceived and bore on Selen's cold peak. Maia herself, if we can trust the tales, was the child of Atlas, the same Atlas who supports the star-studded sky, and so our bloodlines branch from a common source. Relying on this, I did not approach you through ambassadors or artful overtures. I have come myself and offer you my life, a suppliant at your door. The same Daunians pursue us both in bitter war, thinking that if they drive us out, nothing will stop them from subjugating all Hesperia and controlling the seas that wash her shores. Take my pledge and give me yours. Our hearts are brave in war, our manhood tested." As Aeneas was speaking, Evander was watching him, scanning his face and eyes and entire body. Then he replied briefly, "Bravest of the Teucrians, how gladly I receive you and recognize you. How I recall your father's words, the voice and the face of great Anchises. I remember it all, how Priam, Laomedon's son, on his way to Salamis, stopped to see his sister Hesione, and went on to visit cold Arcadia. I was young then, my cheeks just bearded, and I wondered at the Trojan princes, wondered at Priam himself, but Anchises towered above them all. My heart burned with youthful love. I yearned to meet him, to clasp his hand, and I did approach him and led him eagerly to Phineus's city. When he left, he gave me a beautiful quiver with Lycian arrows, a cloak woven with gold, and a pair of golden bits that my palace now has. So the hand you seek is now joined with yours, and when tomorrow's light has dawned, I will send you forth with men and means. Until then, since you are here as friends, celebrate with us this annual rite, which may not be deferred, and join our feast." So saying, he ordered the table reset and arranged his guests on seats in the grass. Aeneas, as guest of honor, he showed to a lion-skin cushion on a maple throne. Then chosen youths and the priests of the altar outdid each other, serving roast beef, piling baskets high with Ceres' bread, and pouring the wine of Bacchus. Aeneas and his Trojans feasted on long chine and consecrated sweetbreads. When they had satisfied their appetites, King Evander spoke. These solemn rites, this traditional feast, this altar sacred to a power divine, do not come to us from some empty superstition, ignoring the gods of old. No, my Trojan guest, rescued from savage dangers, we observe this annual rite in memory of our deliverance. Look first at this rocky overhang, how the huge boulders are scattered, how the mountain stands in desolation and the crags have crumbled in avalanche. There was once a cave here, its depths never fathomed by sunlight, the lair of a half-human monster, an ogre named Cacus. The ground there always smoked with fresh blood, and nailed to the door hung human heads moldering in decay. The monster's father was Vulcan. It was his black fires Cacus belched as he moved his hulking form. Time at last answered our prayers in the person of a god, the mightiest avenger, Hercules. Glorying in the slaughter of Geryon, and driving that triform ghoul's huge bulls in triumph, filling the Tiber's valley with cattle. Cacus, whose fiendish mind could leave no crime undared or trick untried, rustled forth four superb bulls from their corral and as many equally outstanding heifers. He dragged these cattle by their tails to his cave so no one could track them back to him. Then he hid the animals in the rocky gloom. No one searching could find any telltale marks leading to that cave. Amphitrite's son, meanwhile, was moving the well-fed herds out of their pens, rounding them up for the trail. The cattle lowed as they headed out, and the woods and hills were filled with their bellowing until the echoes began to die away. And then one heifer lowed in response from the depths of the cave, undoing Cacus. The wrath of Hercules flared with black bile. He seized his weapons, his heavy, knotted club, and ran straight up the slope like the mountain wind. It was then he first saw Cacus afraid, eyes shifting with terror. He flew to his cave faster than the east wind. Fear lent wings to his feet. He shut himself in and broke the chains that held the giant rock suspended in iron by his father's craft. The rock dropped down, blocking the entrance, at just the moment when Hercules arrived, raging mad. He scanned every approach, looking around and gnashing his teeth. 3 times he traversed the Aventine Mount. 3 times he tried the rock-solid entrance. 3 times he sank down in the valley, exhausted. On the cave's ridge stood an immense dagger of flint, tall, sheer rock, a perfect nestling place for vultures. It leaned left, with the ridge slope toward the river. The hero pushed from the right, shook it loose, wrenched it up from its roots, and abruptly heaved it forward. With that heave, heaven thundered. The banks below split apart, and the astonished river recoiled in terror. Cacus's immense lair lay open, revealing the shadowy depths of the cavern below. As if earth itself were split apart by some unknown power, disclosing the pit and the moldy horror loathed by the gods, the abyss is laid open, and the pale ghosts tremble at the light streaming in from above. Cacus was caught in the unexpected daylight. Penned in by rock walls, he howled eerily as Hercules rained down upon him everything he could throw, weapons, branches, colossal millstones. Cornered, Cacus did the only thing he could, belching out clouds of smoke, an amazing display, that enshrouded his subterranean home in blinding smog shot through with dark flames. Undeterred, Hercules hurled himself into the inferno, where the huge cave was choked with roiling smoke. He found Cacus there, spewing forth his fiery vapors in vain. Hercules gripped him in a knotted hold and squeezed until Cacus's eyes bulged out and his throat was drained of blood. Then, with hardly a pause, he tore off the doors and the den was laid bare. The stolen oxen, a theft Cacus had denied, were exposed to the sky, and the gruesome carcass was dragged out by the feet. Men could not get enough of looking at those terrible eyes, that face, the brute's bristled chest, and his throat's quenched fires. From that time on, this has been a festival day, kept by every generation, foremost by Potitius, who founded the rite, and the Pinarian house, priests of Hercules. The hero himself established this altar, which we will always call mightiest, and always mightiest shall be. Come then, young men, wreathe your hair with leaves in honor of these glorious deeds. Hold out your cups, call on the gods to share our feast and pour the wine. Thus Evander, wreathing his head with poplar, whose green twilight shade is dear to Hercules. The sacred goblet filled the king's hand, and all poured libation and prayed to the gods. The great sky turned, and evening came on. The priests went forth, Potitius at their head, dressed in ritual skins and bearing torches. They renewed the feast with welcome offerings, and heaped the altars with laden platters. The Salii, weeping priests of Mars, chanted in the glow of the altars, poplar weaving their brows. One chorus of youths, another of elders, and they sang the exploits of Hercules, how in his crib he strangled the twin serpents his stepmother sent, then how he tore down great cities in war, Troy and Oechalia, how he performed 1,000 hard labors under King Eurystheus by Juno's will. Unconquered hero, you slew with your hand the cloud-born centaurs, Helios and Pholus, the monsters of Crete, the huge lion beneath Nemea's high rock. The Stygian pools trembled before you. The watchdog of Orcus, stretched out in his cave on half-gnawed bones, trembled before you. No face of evil ever daunted you, not even to Phoebus, towering in arms. Your wit did not fail you when surrounded by the Hydra's swarm of heads. Hail, true son of Jove, glory added to the gods, bless us with your presence, favor your rights. Such were their songs, and they capped it all with the tale of Cacus, the fire-breathing monster. The woodland rang, and the hills echoed their song. The rites were over, and they all returned to the city. The king, worn with age, walked with Aeneas and his son Pallas, and lighted the journey with conversation. Aeneas ran his eyes over the entire landscape. Charmed by the various locales, he asked for and was delighted to hear the stories behind each one. The races of the men of old. King Evander, founder of Rome's citadel, was speaking. These woods were once haunted by native fauns and nymphs, and a race of men sprung from tough oak trees. They had no rules or arts, did not know how to yoke an ox or lay up stores or manage them. They lived off trees and hunting. Then Saturn came down from highest heaven, fleeing Jove's weapons, exiled from his realm. He brought together the unruly race, scattered across the mountain slopes, and gave them laws. He called the area Latium, since he had hidden safely there a latent presence within its borders. The Golden Age, as men call it, existed under his rule, so peaceful was his reign. Little by little a worse sort of people rose up, dimmer and duller, and with them came passion for war and love of possessions. Then came the Ausonians, the Sicinians, and the land of Saturn often changed its name. The kings arose, and Thybris, harsh and huge, from whose name we Italians called our river the Tiber, and the old Albula lost its true name. As for myself, Fortune Almighty and ineluctable fate drove me from my fatherland to follow the sea to its end, and set me down here, and the dread warnings of my mother, the nymph Carmentis, and of Apollo, august divinity, led me to this very spot. As Evander finished, he pointed out the altar, and what Romans call the Carmental Gate, an ancient tribute to the nymph Carmentis. This prophetic being first sang the greatness of Aeneas's sons, and Pallanteum's glory. Next, he showed a vast grove, which Romulus later would make a refuge. Showed him too the Lupercal, a cave beneath a cold cliffside with the Arcadian name of Lycaean Pan. He showed him the wood of holy Argilatum, and, calling the place to witness, recounted the death of Argus, his guest. From here Evander led to Tarpeia's home and the capital, golden now, but then bristling with thickets. Even then the religious power of this place awed the country folk. Even then they shuddered at the woods and stones. This grove, Evander cried, this tree-crowned hill shelters a god, although which god it is we do not know. But the Arcadians believe they have seen Jupiter himself here, shaking his darkening aegis and gathering the clouds. Within the crumbling wall of these two towns you can see the relics and memorials of men of old. This holy height was built by Father Janus, and that by Saturn. Janiculum this was called, that Saturnia. Talking in this way, they came to Evander's humble dwelling and saw cattle milling about in the Roman Forum, and lowing in the fashionable keels. When they reached his house, Evander said, "The conquering hero Hercules passed through this door. This palace had room enough for him. Dare to despise riches, my guest? Make yourself, too, worthy of godhood. Do not scorn my poverty." He spoke, led immense Aeneas under his low roof, and set him on a couch spread with leaves and a Libyan bearskin. Night fell, enfolding the earth in dusky wings. Venus, her mother's heart troubled by the very real Laurentine threat, spoke to Vulcan in their golden bedroom, breathing into her words immortal love. While the Argive warlords ravaged Troy and her walls doomed to fall in enemy fire, I asked no aid for the victims, no weapons forged by your art. No, dearest husband, I did not wish to trouble you in vain. However much I owed to Priam's children, and however much I wept for Aeneas in his distress. Now by Jupiter's commands he stands in Rutulian territory. Now therefore I come, as suppliant to your sacred power, begging arms, a mother for her son. Thetis could sway you with tears, and Aurora. See the nations mustering, the walled cities whetting steel to destroy my people. Vulcan hesitated, but when the goddess wrapped her snowy arms around him and fondled him in her soft embrace, he felt the familiar heat flash through his bones, like lightning splitting a thunderhead, a crackling flash in the rumbling sky. Venus felt it and smiled to herself, and Vulcan, chained by eternal love. Why reach so far back for reasons? What happened to your faith in me, goddess? If you had been as anxious then, it would have been right for me to arm the Trojans. Neither the Father Almighty nor fate forbade that Troy stand or Priam live 10 years more. Now, if your mind is set on war, all the care I can promise in my craft, all that can be done with iron or electrum, all that fire and air can avail, well, stop praying and just trust your powers. Saying this, he gave her the embrace they both wanted and melted into sleep on his wife's bosom. Vulcan woke in the middle of the night. In the waning darkness, when sleep gives way to rest, a housewife who subsists on spinning and weaving stirs the embers, adding night to her work day, and has her women toil long hours by lamplight so she may keep her husband's bed chaste and rear her sons. So too the Lord of Fire, no slower at that hour, rose from his soft bed and went to his smithy. There is an island off the Sicilian coast, hard by Aeolian Lipar. Smoking rocks rise to a peak, and subterranean vaults thunder in its bowels, hollowed out by Cyclopean forges. Strong hammer strokes echo from anvils. Smelted lumps of iron hiss through caverns. Fire pants in the furnace. To this island, called Vulcania from its master's name, down came the Fire Lord from heaven's height. The Cyclopes were forging iron in the vast cave. Brontes, Steropes, and bare-armed Pyracmon. They had just shaped a thunderbolt, part polished, like the many Jupiter hurls down from heaven, part still unfinished. They had twisted in 3 rays of pelting hail, 3 of watery cloud, and added 3 of red fire and winged south wind. Now they were blending in terrifying flashes, noise and fear, wrath with pursuing flames. Elsewhere they were busy with the flying chariot for Mars to use when he inflames men and cities. And they bent over the petrifying aegis of Pallas, burnishing it with golden scales of serpents, and polishing the goddess's breastplate, which writhed with serpents around the severed head and rolling eyes of the Gorgon Medusa. "Stop all work," he cried. "Cyclopes of Aetna, turn your minds now to arms for a hero. I want strength, fast hands, master craftsmanship, and no delays." This was all they needed to hear. They divided the work equally and bent down to it. Bronze and gold flowed in streams of hot metal and Caleb iron. The raw material for so many wounds was melted down in the furnace. They formed a great shield, one shield against all the weapons of the Latins. 7 welded layers, circle upon circle. Some worked the bellows, others tempered the hissing bronze in the lake. The cave groaned with a thud of anvils. The Cyclopes' great hammers rose and fell in cadence, and they turned the metal with tongs. While the lord of Lemnos was busy on Vulcania, the gentle light of morning and the songs of swallows beneath the eaves roused Evander from his humble home. The old man put on a tunic and strapped Tyrrhenian sandals on his feet, buckled on his Tygean sword, and flung back a leopard skin to hang from his left shoulder. 2 hounds, one trotting ahead and one at his heels, accompanied the hero as he left his threshold and made his way to Aeneas's lodging, mindful of the aid he had promised the Trojan. Aeneas was up just as early. With him walked Achates, as with Evander walked his son, Pallas. They clasped hands when they met and sat in the courtyard conversing freely at last. The king began. Trojan commander, for while you live, I will never admit that Troy's realm has been conquered. Our strength to aid you in war is weak compared to our great name. We Arcadians are hemmed in on one side by the river, and on the other by Rutulians, rattling their weapons round our walls. But I propose to form a coalition, to link with you an army of royal forces, a salvation no one could have guessed. The fates must have called you here. Not far from where we sit is the city of Agylla, built of ancient stone in the Tuscan hills. The Lydians, a warlike race, settled there long ago, and long it prospered until an arrogant king, Mezentius, came into power and ruled with iron hand. Why recount the tyrant's acts of butchery? May it fall on his own head and on his own brood. He would even bind living men to corpses, hand to hand and mouth to mouth, until by slow torture the living met their death. In the putrefaction of that ghastly embrace, at last the weary citizens rose in revolt, besieged the unspeakable monster in his palace, cut down his men, and fired the roof. In the mayhem, Mezentius escaped and found refuge on Rutulian soil, under the protection of Turnus. All Etruria has risen in righteous rage. Their terms are extradition of the king or immediate war. I will make you commander of these thousands, Aeneas. Their troop ships line the shore and clamor for the standards to advance. However, an old soothsayer holds them in check, intoning fate. Chosen warriors, flower of Maeonia's ancient race, just resentment sends you forth to war. Mezentius inflames your indignant rage. The gods forbid that any Italian should be in command of so great a race. Choose leaders from abroad. The Etruscans are encamped on the plain in awe of heaven. Tarchon himself has sent me envoys with the crown and scepter of the realm, inviting me to command the army, and succeeds to the Etruscan throne. But my old age, cold and slow, begrudges me military command. I am too weak for war. I would urge my son to do it, but his mother is Sabine, and so his blood is mixed. But you, blessed by fate in years and race, called by heaven, do your duty. Lead the Italians and Trojans both. Further, I will put Pallas at your side, Pallas our hope and comfort. Let him learn from you to endure the work of war. Let him observe all you do and respect you from his early years. To Pallas I will give 200 cavalry, Arcadia's finest, and he will give you as many more himself. Evander finished. Aeneas, son of Anchises, and loyal Achates would have sat a long time, eyes fixed, brooding on troubles of their own, but Venus gave them a sign. Lightning flashed with thunder in the open sky, and everything suddenly seemed to reel. A Tuscan trumpet pealed through the sky. They looked up as thunder split the heavens again and again. In a clear patch of sky they saw arms gleaming like red fire through the pure air and clashing in thunder. The others gaped with fear, but Aeneas knew the sound and the promise of his mother, and said, "Ask not what the portents forebode, my dear host. In truth, do not ask. It is I who am summoned by heaven. The goddess who bore me foretold she would send this sign if war was near, and that she would aid me, bringing through the air arms forged by Vulcan. Ah, the slaughter in store for the poor Laurentines! What a price you will pay me, Turnus! How many shields and helmets and bodies of the brave will you, Father Tiber, roll beneath your waves? Let them call for battle and break their treaty." With this, Aeneas rose and rekindled the fire. On Hercules' altar, approaching with joy the Lar of yesterday and the small household altar, Evander and the Trojans side by side sacrificed ewes ritually culled from the herd. Then Aeneas went to his ships and handpicked the best men on board to follow him to war, leaving the rest to ride the current downstream and bring word to Ascanius of his father's fortunes. The Teucrians bound for Etruscan fields were given horses. Aeneas's spirited mount was caparisoned in a lion skin, tawny and glittering with claws of gold. Rumor flew through the little town, spreading the news that horsemen were storming to the shores of the Tyrrhenian king. Mothers redoubled their vows, their fear more immediate now, and the image of the war god loomed larger. Then Evander, clasping the hand of his departing son, clung to him, weeping beyond measure. "If only Jupiter could turn back the years and make me what I was, under Praeneste's walls, when I cut down the enemy's foremost ranks and burned their shields in triumph. This right hand sent King Aeolus down to Tartarus. His mother, Feronia, had given him at birth 3 lives, 3 changes of armor, so that he had to be faced 3 horrifying times and laid low in death each time. Yet this right hand stripped him of all his lives and of his armor. If I could be as I was then, I would never be torn from your sweet embrace, nor would Mezentius ever have heaped such scorn upon his neighbor's head, or put so many to the sword, or widowed the town of so many of her sons. Your powers above, and Jupiter, supreme ruler of the gods, pity the king of the Arcadians, and hear a father's prayer. If it is your will to keep my palace safe, if it is his destiny, if I will see him and come to him among the living, then I pray for life. I can endure any trial. But if, fortune, you threaten some dire mischance, cut off my cruel life now, while fears are still unsure, and hope uncertain, while you, dear child, my late and only joy, are in my arms, then no ill-omened words could wound my ears." As Pallas's father poured forth these words at their last parting, he fell unconscious, and his servants lifted him up and bore him into the house. The horsemen rode out from the open gates, led by Aeneas and loyal Achates, and the other foremost Trojans. Pallas himself rode in the column's center, conspicuous in his cloak and figured armor, like the morning star loved by Venus, as no other star when it rises from ocean, a sacred light in the sky melting the dark. On the walls mothers stood trembling, eyes following the cloud of dust and the gleaming bronze squadrons heading off through the brush by the shortest path. A shout went up, the column tightened, and the horses thundered across the plain. Near Cares' cold stream stands a vast grove steeped in religious awe. It lies in a hollow, ringed by dark fir trees that march up the hills. Rumor has it that the old Pelasgians, who first held Latium in ages past, dedicated the grove and a festal day to Silvanus, god of fields and flock. Not far from this grove, Tarchon encamped with his Tyrrhenians, who pitched their tents throughout the fields. Their encampment could be seen from the hilltops, and Aeneas made his way there with his elite troops. They watered their horses and took their rest. Venus, a brightness in the air, drew near, bearing gifts through the clouds. She saw her son in the hidden valley, standing alone by a cold stream, and making herself visible to him, she said, "Here are the gifts I promise, forged to a wonder by my husband's skill. Now you need not hesitate, my son, to challenge the proud Laurentines, or engage Turnus in combat." The Cytherean spoke, and went to receive her son's embrace. Then she set out before him under an oak tree the refulgent armor. Aeneas gloried in the gifts from heaven, in this high honor, and he could not satisfy his eyes as they moved from one part to another. He was lost in wonder as he turned each piece over in his hands, and cradled it in his arms. The flaring helmet with its threatening crest, the lethal sword, the stiff bronze corselet, as red as blood, glowing from within like a cobalt thunderhead when it catches fire from the rays of the sun. Then the smooth greaves in electrum and gold, the spear and the shield's ineffable design. On it the fire god had prophetically wrought the future of Italy, and Roman triumphs in the coming ages, every generation in order, still to be born from the stock of Ascanius, and all the wars they would fight. On it he made the she-wolf lying in Mars' green cave with the twin boys playing as they sucked fearlessly at their mother's breast, her sculpted head turned back to nuzzle each in turn and lick them into shape. Close by he put Rome and the Sabine women, carried off lawlessly from the seated crowds at the great circus games, and then sudden war between the sons of Romulus and aged Tatius with his stern Curies. Next, peace between them, the same king standing armed before Jupiter's altar, holding shallow bowls as they made their treaty over sacrificed sow. The roof of Romulus's palace bristled with fresh thatch. Not far from there, 4-horse chariots were driven in opposite directions, and a man chained between them had been torn apart. Metis, you should have kept your word, Albin. Tullus was dragging the traitor's entrails through brambles spattered with drops of blood. And there was Porsenna besieging the city to restore by force the exiled Tarquin to Rome. Aeneas's descendants rushed on the sword for freedom's sake. You could see Porsenna portrayed as scowling, portrayed as threatening, because Cocles dared to tear down the ridge, and Cloelia broke free and swam the river. At the top, Manlius, captain of the Tarpeian fort, stood before the temple and held the high capital. And here the silver goose was fluttering through gilded porticos, cackling that the Gauls were at the gate. You could see the Gauls lurking in thickets under cover of darkness and the shadows of night. Their hair was gold in the gloom, their cloaks shimmered with golden stripes, and their milk-white necks were circled with gold. Each of them wielded 2 alpine pikes and a body-length shield. And here he had forged the leaping Sally, the naked Luperci, their ritual caps bound with wool, the shields fallen from heaven, and the solemn procession of chaste Roman matrons in cushioned chariots. Far below he set the hells of Tartarus, the high gates of Dis, and the wages of sin. You, Catiline, were hung from the frowning face of a cliff, and trembled at the Furies, while Cato, set apart, gave laws to the good. These scenes were lapped by the swelling sea, pure gold, yet the water was blue and flecked with white caps. Circling dolphins, picked out in silver, cut through the waves, and their tails flicked the spume. In the center, bronze ships, the Battle of Actium. You could see all Leucata seething with war, and the waves glistening with golden fire. On one side, leading Italy into battle, with the Senate, the people, the city's penates, and all the great gods, stood Caesar Augustus on his ship's high stern, a double flame licking his temples, and above his head shone his father's star. Elsewhere, Agrippa, backed with winds and gods, towered over his fleet of ships, and on his brow gleamed the beaked naval crown, his proud insignia. On the other side, Antony, conqueror of the East, fresh from the Red Sea, marshaled his armies, a rich melange of all the Orient's might, from Egypt to Bactria, and in his convoy, to his eternal shame, was his Egyptian wife. The ships all rushed on at once, and the whole sea foamed, ripped by the oars and the triple-pronged beaks, as they made for deep water. You would think the Cyclades, uprooted from the seafloor, were floating there, or that high mountains crashed upon mountains, so massive the assault launched by seamen, from one turreted ship upon another, flaming pitch raining down, steel flying, as Neptune's fields turned crimson with blood. Among them, the queen, rattling Egyptian timbrels, called upon her warships, still unaware of the twin snakes at her back, barking Anubis and monstrous gods of every description, fought against Neptune, Minerva, and Venus. Chiseled in iron at the eye of the battle, Mars raged. The Furies swooped from the sky in exultant discord, robe torn, strode forward, followed by Bellona with her bloody scourge. Apollo looked down on all this from Actium and was bending his bow. In shock and awe, Egypt and India, all the Sabaeans and Arabs were in full retreat. The queen herself was calling for wind, spreading her sails, and hurrying to pay out the slackened ropes. The fire god had made her pale as death, amid all the carnage, driven over the waves by winds from Apulia toward the morning Nile. The great river god had opened all the folds of his copious robe and welcomed the vanquished into the sheltering waters of his azure lap. But Caesar entered Rome in triple triumph and consecrated his immortal votive offering to the gods of Italy. 300 great shrines throughout the city. The streets rang with joyful festivities. At every temple was a chorus of matrons. There were altars at every temple, and slaughtered steers blanketed the ground before each altar. Caesar himself, seated at the polished marble threshold of Phoebus Apollo, reviewed the gifts from the world's nations and hung them high on the temple's doorposts, while the conquered people marched on past in long procession, each as different in their clothes and gear as in the tongues they spoke. Here the immortal blacksmith had fashioned the nomads, the loose-robed African people, the Leliges and Carians, and the quivered Scythians. The Euphrates now flowed with a softer current. The Morini were here from the ends of the earth, the two-horned Rhine, the indomitable Dahe, and the Araxes, vexed at his stream being bridged. Such was the design of the shield Vulcan made, Venus's gift to her son. Aeneas was moved to wonder and joy by the images of things he could not fathom, and he lifted to his shoulder the destiny of his children's children.